Teddy Roosevelt 2019 is not monetized. If you like this content, please like, subscribe, and share.
Right after 9/11, about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq."
3 years after we were in the war in Iraq, a journalist asks George Bush a question and catches him off guard. He asks him what Saddam Hussein had to do with 9/11. You're going to be surprised at the answer.
What did Iraq have to do with what? The attack on the World Trade Center. Nothing.
It had nothing to do with the attack on the World Trade Center. So why, Mr. Bush, did we go to war? I thought you said we were going to take the war to those that attacked us.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
What if I put my tinfoil hat on when I talk about these interventionist foreign policy wars and regime change wars? The tinfoil hat thinks military-industrial complex.
Yeah.
People being asked or forced into making decisions that benefit these giant corporations that make weapons and profit off of war.
They had the little mobile units that we had to put our clothes in, like a net duffel bag. Halliburton charged the government $100 for every bag of clothes they washed.
Whenever we got our laundry back, it felt worse than when we turned it in. Everything was still grimy. I stopped taking my laundry into KBR, and instead, I was washing it in the sink. And I was told by my chain of command that I was not allowed to wash my laundry on my own. I had to take it to KBR to have it washed, even though we all knew that they were doing a horrible job because they get $99 a bag for a bag of laundry that I could do at home for $3.
Yeah.
This is the worst case scenario in terms of conspiracy theories. The idea that someone wants war so that they can make money and they don't care if people die, even needlessly.
Feeding the troops. The Pentagon has found some serious problems with Halliburton's work on that contract as well.
Pentagon auditors found that a Halliburton contract to provide food and housing for American troops had a staggering $1.8 billion in unsupported costs.
It was all a scam. Halliburton was charging $45 for a six-pack can of Coke or Pepsi that they give us and the military free in the mess hall.
Now, these sodas were made right there in the desert. It's not as if they were brought over from the United States. These sodas were made with Arabic wraps, Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, whatever, right there in the desert. So it's not as if they had an exorbitant transportation rate.
This is our number one conspiracy fear, right? If you had to think about, of all the things that you hope are not true about the way the world works, that would probably be number one.
Well, you can take your tinfoil hat off because the military-industrial complex is a real thing. This is something that President Eisenhower talked about.
Which is an amazing speech.
Amazing speech. His last speech as President of the United States, of all the things that he could talk about, he chose to focus on the military-industrial complex.
Should
and
we
how
play
dangerous
that right now?
It is.
I feel like we should play that.
Yes,
just because
absolutely.
It's
play
so,
that clip.
It's so crazy, and most people have never heard it before. And you hear about the term military-industrial complex, and one thing that has been done that's really interesting is the word conspiracy has become a dirty word.
Yeah.
And that dirty word, or a word that's it's easy to make something silly by calling it a conspiracy.
Yeah.
Even though there are times where people conspire to do things.
That's right.
I mean, that's why that word exists.
Right.
I mean, it's not like people don't make plans to do things that are illegal.
Yeah.
Of course they do. That's why the FBI is around.
Yeah. What most people don't know is that his first draft of that speech said Congressional Military Industrial Complex.
Whoa.
And somewhere between the draft and the speech that was delivered, he took out that word congressional. But he was directly connecting those dots.
Whoa.
That some may say, oh, well, that's just a conspiracy theory, but he was connecting those dots with the influence that the military-industrial complex has on leaders in Congress who are making decisions about how our money is spent and where our troops are sent off into battle.
Congressional military-industrial complex. Wow. I need extra foil.
Get you a new box.
Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
Right after 9/11, about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me, and one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran." I said, "Is it classified?" He said, "Yes, sir." I said, "Well, don't show it to me." And I saw him a year or so ago, and I said, "You remember that?" He said, "Sir, I didn't show you that memo. I didn't show."
Political war of words has erupted into a full-blown public feud. It's playing itself out between two Democrats, 2016 presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, current 2020 contender Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, and neither are mincing words. The battle started when Clinton said this about Gabbard during a podcast.
I'm not making any predictions, but I think they've got their eye on somebody who's currently in the Democratic primary and are grooming her to be the third-party candidate. She's the favorite of the Russians. They have a bunch of sites and bots and other ways of supporting her so far. And that's assuming Jill Stein will give it up, which she might not, because she's also a Russian asset. Yeah, she's a Russian asset. I mean, totally.
Gabbard didn't hold back in slamming Clinton, calling her the queen of warmongers, embodiment of corruption, and personification of the rot that has sickened the Democratic Party for so long. Clinton didn't name Gabbard, but when asked if she was in fact referring to the Hawaii Congresswoman, her spokesman said, if the nesting doll fits.
I will end the regime change wars that have taken far too many lives, cost trillions of dollars, and undermined our security.
Election. Barack Obama approved the new administration's first military budget. This amounts to $680 billion, $30 billion more than Bush's last defense budget.
January 20, 2009, a headline and history. Barack Obama takes the oath of office.
On this day, we come to proclaim an end to the petty grievances and false promises, the recriminations and worn-out dogmas that for far too long have strangled our politics.
Now, 3 years after his election, gridlock grips Washington, and Obama faces a tough campaign for a second term. About half of voters disapprove of his job performance. 3/4 think the country's on the wrong track.